Dark Souls 3 is the third installment in the Dark Souls series. Obviously. It's a series that prides itself on impressive level designs, difficult enemies and environments, and even more difficult boss fights. I beat Dark Souls 1 about a year ago, and it was an incredible experience that I needed more of. So, I played and beat Dark Souls 2, and that was an experience. Slightly demoralized by DS2, I took about 6 months off from playing the series, but I kept on hearing great things about DS3. So reluctantly, I picked up the sticks and started on my journey. What follows next is my DS3 adventure, a quest through Lothric to find and defeat the Lords of Cinder. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe as it helps the channel a lot. Enjoy! It was time to pick my starting class, and after 10 minutes of waffling, I chose to start as a knight because I lack originality. I woke up in an ash-filled cemetery and dropped a few enemies before running into a spiky lizard. I died to him multiple times before finally beating him and realizing that he was an optional enemy. I shook that off and found myself lighting my first bonfire of the run. Bonfires are save points that you warp to if and when you die. They also act as a method of fast travel between areas of the game, which will help save time later on. After lighting it, I found myself in a new arena, face to face with the first boss of the game. He was a large human-esque soldier that transformed into a half-snake, half-dragon, half-man midway through the fight. Surprisingly, he caused no issues for me, and I beat him first try. After proving my dominance over Gundyr, I walked into Firelink Shrine, which is essentially your home base for the game. You're able to level up your character and improve your weapons here, among many other things. I spoke to this blind girl, made a new bonfire, and traveled to the High Wall of Lothric. I explored this castle wall for a while, getting beaten up by knights, burned by dragons, and killed by another half-snake, half-man thing, before finally finding the right path. I came across Kevin James in a suit of armor who killed me repeatedly. I enacted my revenge to realize he too was an optional enemy who I wasted an hour on. I traveled down the castle steps and into an arena, where I met Vort, the next boss of the game. Vort is a bear-like monster who has an entire fitted suit of armor and really doesn't like me. He beat me to a pulp before I realized staying as close to his crotch as possible is the key to this fight. I took him down, waved the banner of blue, and was carried by gargoyles to the undead settlement. I walked into the settlement, lit a bonfire, and found myself being hugged to death by a big preacher woman. I retraced my steps, mowed down this woman's entire congregation without a second thought, and continued onwards. Rockets bombarded me from the sky and impeded my process for about half an hour, until I realized they only shot 3 at a time before giving me a chance to run by. I dodged the rockets and soon arrived at an open courtyard where I met my next boss, the curse-rotted Greatwood. This one was a big tree with disgusting egg-like sacs on its exterior that you had to pop. After popping a few, he broke the ground and brought me to his creepy lair down below. I penetrated the rest of his sacs, and just like that, another boss had been defeated. As if it's a surprise at this point, he was an optional boss. I continued along the path and killed a huge mama rat and her babies before finding myself at the Road of Sacrifices. I only sacrificed myself once before I made it to a swamp where I met the toughest enemy in the game, Mr. Krabs and his big, meaty claws. I made the decision that Mr. Krabs was an optional enemy and ran past him like a little baby. I traversed a small castle and showed up at a ruined courtyard where I met Crystal Sage, the next boss. They were sporting that Wicked Witch of the West fit and had the unbridled anger to go with it. I perished multiple times before realizing I was getting nowhere with my dumbass clothes. I decided to rock the light blue cleric set with the turtle shell on the back. Now that I was looking good, and was also conveniently super resistant to magic, I walked up to Crystal Sage and took them down with ease. After upgrading my character and weapon a bit, I walked through a graveyard of creepy skeletons trying to kill me before arriving at yet another castle. The front door was locked, so I scaled the ramparts and let myself in the side door. I met a giant who didn't appreciate me waking him up. I ran past him and then beat down a soldier who was using an unfairly large shield. I walked into the next room and was promptly jump scared by the love child of Aragog and Gollum. I put him out of his misery, and naturally, he was an optional enemy. I ran past giant number 2 and arrived at the Deacons of the Deep, a group boss made up of religious enemies who were essentially playing hot potato to see who would get killed by me. I struggled very little and had swiftly conquered the next boss. I explored the area a bit more, got pushed off a cliff by Patches, and then came back to push him around a bit. Then, I met the Mother of Rebirth, who was still haunting my nightmares to this day. At this point, I got a bit stuck about where to go before realizing there was another way to go past Mr. Krabs. I was stronger than I was before, so I decided to try and fight him again, and he quickly put me in my place. So I ran by him once again and arrived at a new area called Farron Keep, a poison-filled swamp that I really could have done without. I speed ran through this section lighting the 3 torches, spending very little time looking for extra items or killing enemies. I climbed up to the top of the castle and killed Asylum Demon from the original Dark Souls, and yep, you guessed it, he was optional. I climbed back down the castle, lit a bonfire, and arrived in front of a big door that opened up to reveal the next boss, the Abyss Watchers. These Watchers bore a striking resemblance to Artorias from DS1, and just like Artorias, I struggled against these guys. The game helps you get through Phase 1 by providing an NPC who occasionally attacks the boss, but I was on my own for Phase 2. On my 13th attempt, I realized I could somewhat cheese the boss by baiting out an attack and getting an easy backstab. Many backstabs later, I was still standing, and the first Lord of Cinder had fallen. It was at this point that I understood the main objective of the game: defeat the Lords of Cinder. Truthfully, I had been wandering somewhat aimlessly at this point, and it had just been working out. But now that I had a clear idea of what I was doing, the rest of the game would go quickly, right? Wrong. Now that the Abyss Watchers were dead, I was allowed to enter the Catacombs, an underground dungeon with skeletons that just don't seem to die. Since I couldn't kill them, I ran through the area as fast as possible, and all of a sudden, I was fighting the next boss, the Nintendo Special, a floating head with 2 hands. High Lord Wolnir was his official name, but to me, he'll just be Lord Nintendo. I got past him rather easily, as you just needed to destroy the bling he was wearing. Once he was gone, I arrived at Irithyll. I ran past their alligator guard, who looked suspiciously like Kraid from Metroid, and lit the next bonfire. I thoroughly explored Irithyll and wound up in Irithyll Dungeon, which was teeming with annoying enemies. Creepy nuns, gross amalgamations of limbs, and more skeletons did their best to try and stop me as I progressed through the prison. I reached the bottom floor and found the creepiest enemy in the game, some weird combination of a guard dog and a human. I sprinted away from that as fast as possible and left the prison. I showed up at the profaned capital and saw a large building where I was clearly destined to go to. I avoided fireballs, which I definitely didn't die to, winged statues, and more nuns, and walked into my next boss arena, the lair of Yorm the Giant. I saw an item across the arena next to Yorm's throne, but didn't think anything of it, because I had a boss to fight. I did almost no damage to Yorm and was killed almost immediately. Something fell off, but I couldn't tell what it was. On my 4th attempt, I finally picked up Storm Ruler from his throne, while dying in the process. Now is a good time to talk about weapon arts. In DS3, some weapons have abilities known as weapon arts that allow you to do a secondary attack outside of the normal melee attack. Storm Ruler is one of these weapons. You're able to buff Storm Ruler and unleash a massive ranged attack. I hadn't used weapon arts before, so I didn't realize how to use it for almost an entire stream. Once I realized its true power, I walked into Yorm's arena and got my revenge for the prior 2 hours. The second Lord of Cinder had officially fallen. Now that he was defeated, I retraced my steps to Irithyll, got invaded by another player, and was stomped into the ground like someone who had never played the game. I blamed the lag naturally and shook off the defeat. I found a path in Irithyll that I hadn't taken before and found myself quickly at the door to another boss, Pontiff Sullivan. This guy was an absolute beast for me. Armed with 2 swords, he mowed me down upwards of 25 times. I was consistently getting past his first phase, but his second phase included an illusionary double of himself that was a bit hard to dodge in tandem with the real one's attacks. Eventually, I equipped a shield, actually used the shield, and squeaked out a victory. With the big guy out of the way, I pushed onwards. While being shot at by long-range archers, I scaled the ramparts of a new castle. Well, at least I thought it was a new castle. Turns out, I was actually back in Anor Londo, a location in Dark Souls 1. I made my way through the familiar halls of Anor Londo, expecting a rematch with Ornstein and Smough, arguably the most famous boss fight from DS1. Instead, I was treated to a meeting with the Slither King himself, Aldrich. Aside from a very persistent and deadly bow and arrow attack, Aldrich was a pretty easy boss in my opinion. 5 attempts, and I destroyed the Devourer of Gods, and a 3rd Lord of Cinder had fallen. After that, a large cutscene took place that I didn't pay attention to, and I was transported to a new area and immediately thrown into a second boss fight. Dancer of the Boreal Valley was a dual-wielding swordswoman with slower attacks that packed a punch. The slower attacks were a big shift from a lot of the other bosses in the game, and were a bit annoying to adapt to. I almost beat her on my first try, but fell just a bit short, and I didn't end up beating her until my 10th try. Now that Dancer had danced away, I scooted back to Firelink Shrine to upgrade my character. While there, I realized that I was supposed to be offering up the cinders of the lords to each of their thrones. Offer cinders of a lord? Oh my god, is that what I was supposed to have been doing this whole time? Wait a minute, was I really supposed to have done that? Now here's a guy who has no idea what the hell he's doing in this game. But I think I finally figured something out. Realizing I only had one Lord of Cinder left to defeat, I hurried back to where I defeated Dancer and followed the path to Lothric Castle. I entered the castle and fought many enemies on the way up. There was a strong soldier who had a buddy that kept healing him, another fat guy in armor, and a big boy skeleton with an axe who caught me off guard, among many other enemies. I lit a bonfire about halfway up the castle and was greeted by 2 massive dragons blocking my path. These guys were definitely not letting me by, so I snuck through a side door and killed the one dragon by repeatedly hitting its infected claw. For some reason, the other dragon also died, but I didn't really care how it happened. I was just happy to be done with them. With the dragons gone, I entered the front door, proceeded up the steps, and met my next boss, Dragon Slayer Armour. He was a massive knight with a large axe and a large shield. His combos were strong, and if you got hit by one attack, you lose half your HP. Once I hit his second phase, the railings of the bridge disappeared, and my opponent took advantage of this by pushing me right over the edge to my death. Eventually, I was able to memorize most of his combos, and I brought Dragon Slayer Armour to his knees. This victory gave me access to the Grand Archives, a vertical spiral library that I had to scale. The path through the archives was confusingly difficult by itself, let alone the fact that Crystal Sage, the boss we fought earlier, was here trying to kill me on every new floor of the library. As I ascended the level, I dumped my head in wax to avoid getting cursed, I killed Crystal Sage again, and made it outside. I ran into my old winged statue friends from Profaned Capital. I reminded them who was boss, then I lit another bonfire. From here, I entered one long gauntlet of enemies. I realized there was likely a boss at the end, but thought it would be a good idea to kill all the enemies first. Once they were all gone, I entered the Fog Gate. Lorien, the Elder Prince, was a physically disabled knight whose brother Lothric, on the sidelines, used magic to teleport him around the arena. This caught me off guard at first, and I perished quickly. I made the long run back through the enemies to fight him again and again. At some point, I finally reduced his health bar to 0, only to have Lothric join the fight and revive his fallen brother. I realized rather quickly that I would need to kill Lothric before Lorien, or else he would keep reviving. After 20 or so attempts, I was able to kill Lorien and take out Lothric while he was attempting to revive his brother. And with that, the final Lord of Cinder had fallen, and I returned to Firelink Shrine. At this point, I didn't realize how little I had left of the game since I was playing it completely blind, so I ended my stream not knowing that I was about to face the final boss. Next stream, I placed the final Cinders of Lord on the rightful throne and was transported to the Kiln of the First Flame. Kinda looks like another Gwyn, doesn't it? I entered the arena and was now face to face with the Soul of Cinder, a manifestation of all those who had previously linked the fire. Its moveset was incredibly broad, using magic, a sword, or a staff, among other weapons throughout the fight. Once I got it to phase 2, on my 6th attempt, its health bar refilled and its moveset changed back to that of the final boss from Dark Souls 1, Gwyn. After about 2 hours of attempts, this finally happened. Come on. By far the hardest boss I faced, and it's not even a question. Link the First Flame. This is how the first game ended, though. I mean, I'll link the flame. Am I playing the DLC? I don't know, I think I have to beat the game first. Unless that was the final boss. Was that... That was the final boss of the game? Brother. I did not think that was the final boss. I thought that was an endgame boss, but not the endgame boss. Wow. So there it is. That's the story of how I beat Dark Souls 3 and didn't even realize it. Thanks so much for watching the video. I truly hope you enjoyed it. If you've made it this far, please like and subscribe as it really helps out the channel a lot. But Until next time, take care.